Interiors during this period are going to, well, let's be honest, they're going to make your head explode. It's just the way it was during the Victorian. Now, the French will tend towards, during this period, during the 19th century, they're going to look at Baroque Rococo or neoclassical design, sort of reviving it. You tend to see more upholstery than you would have seen in the actual period. And you see other subtleties. We see gas lighting, for example, rather than using candles. We see a lot of different ideas, but they're going to mimic those. And usually they will pick one and stick to it for a room. But you can move through a French home and go from sort of a neoclassical revival to a Rococo revival, depending on the space. Whereas when we get to the English, things tend to be a little bit more subdued, but the spaces are really defined. So, for example, there's women's spaces, there's children's spaces, there's servant spaces. Everything has a purpose. Here we see a woman's drawing room, for example, and we see very feminine elements about it. But even this is crowded. The thing you need to understand about Victorian homes is it's all about showing off and having stuff and the right stuff. And so you're going to see very, very crowded areas with very eclectic taste, often bringing things back. If they've traveled somewhere, they're going to bring things back to not only remind themselves, but of course to show off to all their friends how well traveled they are. And the United States, we're going to see a mix of these ideas, especially with an expanding and increasingly wealthy middle class. And sometimes the United States kind of mixes ideas. Sometimes they come up with their own. But you're often going to see this odd combination in the US where you might have Gothic revival in one piece of furniture, but you're going to see Rococo revival in another. It's very, very interesting. The American homes tend to be quite large, and there are a couple of features that I want to point out because you will see these on a regular basis in practice. First of all, there is almost always a picture rail. You need to get clips for that picture rail to hang pictures. The idea originally was to hang pictures to cover the walls, as we see here, although this isn't quite as dense as many that I have seen. You can get to the point where you cover the walls almost entirely, just going around pieces of furniture. You'll notice the furniture, you have beautiful cushions and fabrics, but we almost lose the piece that's underneath it, and we tend to see mismatch as we see here. So very common in the United States. And this is where it kind of makes your head explode. They're not decorating in a specific style, in a specific form. They're borrowing from all over the place, creating a hybrid of their own. The only key element that tends to be part of this is a busyness and an eclectic nature. In terms of floors, what we tend to see across the board is they're going to use that parapet flooring, so various geometric decorations in the floors. And they're going to use rugs. And by the way, if you had one of these homes or a smaller version, but you were not in the upper middle class, you would throw down a rug and you could actually stencil on the pattern of a hardwood floor right onto your floors. You would draw the lines on and act like it was perfectly fine. Although if you were in the lower classes, this would be a plywood floor or a uneven variable width floor with wood flooring. So we would see long planks running along here. But of course, many of these Victorians belong to people who are better off. And here we see the use of that rug, always in some kind of quote-unquote Persian or Oriental pattern. Again, giving a sense of status. Walls are really an interesting issue. First, we need to deal with wallpaper. Now, wallpaper becomes much cheaper in this period. It becomes easier to print. The English will have a tax on it for a long time, so we see more painted walls there, or walls that are painted are embossed, so we'll have paper that is embossed, in other words, it has a three-dimensional form on it, and then people will paint it in themselves to get around the tax in England. But we tend to see certain characteristics. We tend to see a tripartite development of the wall. We're going to see an upper decoration, some kind of sort of decorative molding, decorative border. Border would be a better word. We're going to see the bulk of the wall in in a different motif. And then we're going to see a chair rail, which may or may not be real. Sometimes it's just printed on the wallpaper. But here we see mimicking a chair rail and then mimicking that low wainscoting that you might see, for example, in the English Renaissance. But this is all done in wallpaper. You'll also see that it is bright, vibrant. Even here in this original black and white, you get a sense for just how busy the wallpaper is, along with everything else in the home. These are not calm, minimalist places by any means. Now, if you paint your walls, which many people will, they will pick bright, vibrant colors, far brighter than what we're used to. And the thing is, both in colonial America as well as in the 19th century in America, as well as Europe, the brighter the color you use, that's a status symbol, because that means you need more pigment added to the paint, which makes it more expensive. All those colonial Williamsburg colors, the subtle blue, the subtle red, that are faded and kind of comfortable. In fact, they would have been incredibly vibrant, and they have simply faded over time because the binder tends to get cloudy and fades the pigment. It's not the pigment itself fading. It can't in the old forms. Although today, synthetic pigments, of course, can fade. And they're going to go one of two ways. Either they use contrasting colors. Here we see a predominantly green and predominantly red color used in the same room. In fact, moldings juxtapositioning those two colors right against each other. Or they will pick analogous colors. Analogous colors are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. And that is probably the easiest way to come up with a color scheme that will work comfortably in any room, whereas it's very difficult to use contrasting colors or colors across from each other on the color wheel and make it look good. Of course, this could be chaotic and migraine-inducing if poorly done. But my point is, these are very brightly colored, and that's something to keep in mind if you're handed a Victorian to decorate. The ceilings. Now, upper class ceilings will have these decorative moldings. We've seen this in the English Renaissance. We've seen this elsewhere. And they're going to use some kind of roundel or form, usually around a hanging lamp. Originally, this would have been candlelit candelabra, candlelit chandelier. It could have been a gas chandelier. Oftentimes they were. Here it's electric, but the same principle applies. If you're wealthy, this is plaster. And this is all done in plaster in place. It takes incredible skill to work out. If you were less well off, you would use paper mache. And you would buy a mold similar to this, and you could create a paper mache form, which then would be painted and applied to the ceiling. So don't be surprised if you are painting a ceiling and you go, wow, this spot is soft. What is that? Oh, that's paper mache. That's going to be a bit of an issue. So if you come across that, make sure it is properly sealed before you paint it. But you can see how people are getting around things, and people are trying to keep up with the Joneses. It's kind of what we do in our homes, especially in the middle class. The upper classes don't care because they have money. They have nothing to prove. The lower classes don't have enough to decorate a house or even buy a house. But the middle class, they want to show off their status. They want to show off how rich they are, and so they're going to do these things. They're going to use these massive roundels and decorated ceilings. During this period, later in this period, you can also see tin ceilings in the US, although those will primarily be used in commercial spaces.